Hi, I'm Joe. I want to make a video series where I talk about how you shoot in manual mode with a digital camera. So if you buy a digital mirrorless camera, you have a few different modes that you can put the camera in order to start taking photographs. A lot of people get a new camera and they just use that camera in automatic mode. So in automatic mode, the camera is making all of the decisions for you. And when you get better at photography, you end up changing to manual mode most often. There's a couple other modes like aperture priority or shutter priority, but I'm not going to talk about those. I'm just going to talk about manual mode. And this is going to be a series, so I'm not going to tell you every little thing about how to do manual mode. Right now, I want to focus on what is manual mode and why does it matter? Why should you care about shooting in manual mode instead of just shooting in automatic mode? So in manual mode, you have control over all of the settings. So what are those settings? Well, you have control over the shutter speed. The shutter speed controls how much or how long the sensor is exposed to light. So imagine there's this physical wall and you can have that wall open for 3 seconds, 1/2000th of a second, 1/8000th of a second. So how long is that open to allow light to reach your sensor? You also are going to be able to control aperture. So aperture is this opening in your lens. So if you have the opening really wide, you can allow a lot of light to come in at once. If the opening is small, you're allowing less light to come in at once. Aperture also controls what's in focus. Then you have ISO. Some people say ISO, some people say ISO. I don't really care what you say, but ISO is how sensitive your camera's sensor is to light. So if you are in a dark setting, you might have your ISO be higher. In astrophotography, your ISO could be 3200. Out in the bright daylight at 12 o'clock noon, your ISO could be 100, 200, maybe 400. The trade-offs are that a higher ISO can produce a grainier image. Another thing that you'll control in manual mode is white balance. So white balance is a little bit confusing, but basically you're trying to adjust for these color casts, whether that's a warm or a cool color cast, so that something that looks white in person looks white in your photograph. So when it's sunset, you get a really orange light, and you can balance that orange light out by shifting more towards the blues. And in the evening, the light can be really cool. Like right after sunset, the light can be really cool, and that's called blue hour, even though blue hour only lasts for maybe 10 to 20 minutes. But there can be a really strong blue color. You might like that, or you might want to balance it out and add more warmth. Now, white balance, there's a lot of creativity with it, but it's something that you can control. And so in automatic mode, the camera might be choosing the white balance for you. Okay, so now we kind of have this idea that when you're shooting manual mode, you're controlling the shutter, the aperture, the ISO, and normally in YouTube videos, they just stick with those 3 things. But I want to also add white balance because white balance is really important to know about. And so why do we want to shoot manual? Who cares? Like, how does it help us? So the first reason that it helps us is if you're shooting a lot of photographs in an event, like a wedding or some sort of party, if you have your camera on manual mode, all of your settings are locked in. So your white balance is locked in and it's not changing. So if I'm taking photographs at an outdoor wedding, I might have my white balance be at 5600, which is natural daylight, and I might have it stay at that the whole time. If I was shooting in automatic mode, the camera might be changing the white balance for each shot. And so when you come back and you have hundreds of photographs, all of the photographs have different white balances, they have different settings. So this makes it more challenging because in automatic mode, with all of the photographs having these different settings, I need to edit each one of those individually. If I'm on manual mode and I take 100 photographs and the white balance is locked and a lot of the other settings are locked, then I can edit one photograph and then I can copy and paste those edits to all of them. So I'm really only editing one photograph in manual mode and then copy pasting. So using manual mode gives you the ability to edit faster. Manual mode, it also offers more creativity. And the reason for this is your camera doesn't always see things the way that your eye does. And you also have to take into account editing software. So editing software can really manipulate your photo, and sometimes you're going to take a picture where the camera's going to think that the exposure, how bright or how dark the image is incorrect. But you're going to know that in your editing software you can fix that. So digital cameras save a lot of data in the shadows, the darker parts of the image. So if part of your image is too dark, in your editing software, you can bring the brightness up in those shadows. Digital cameras are not very good at keeping detail in the bright areas, the highlights of your image. So a lot of photographers will take pictures where the shadows are darker than you would think looks good. So right out of camera, you think, oh, the dark areas are way too dark. This doesn't look good. But they know that when they bring that photograph into their editing software, they can easily just bring the brightness up. So I'm going to show you a photograph of a wedding. And here's the bride and groom. They're on the altar. You can see that the shadows, like the suit or look at the back fence, the shadows are too dark. Now look at the final image and you can see I brightened everything up. So I didn't want the sky to be pure white. So I exposed the image more for the sky because I knew that I could just go back and bring the shadows up and brighten the shadows. So a lot of this might be a little bit confusing if you're just starting out, but I want you to understand that you know more than your camera, and you are going to shoot for the final edit. You're not necessarily shooting for how the picture looks straight out of camera, okay? So you're shooting for the edit. So just to recap, we have shutter speed, aperture, ISO, white balance. Those are things that you're controlling in manual mode. You're using manual mode to make editing easier, and because you know more than the camera and you know the power of your editing software. So your camera might tell you that your photograph isn't going to look good, but you already know that and you're shooting for the final edit. So thank you so much for listening. Hopefully that made sense. Hopefully that helps you understand what manual mode is and why you might shoot in manual mode. In a later video, I want to talk about the actual components of manual mode. So what to know about shutter speed, what to know about aperture, going more in depth with ISO and white balance and things like that. But I think before you start actually taking the photograph and using manual mode, you have to understand what it is and why it's important or why it might be helpful. This is a video that I wish I had when I was first starting, so hopefully there's someone out there where this video helps. All right, thank you so much for your time. Let me know what you think in the comments. Promise I'll get back to you. Bye.